Good morning, First Baptist Church family, and welcome to this time of spiritual reflection as we look at the book of Micah. I am coming on a little bit early. It's 10 o'clock. It's not 10:30 like I usually try to go on a live. But due to a prior engagement, we're going to look at this a little earlier. If you happen to get on at 10:30, that's fine. You can still leave your comments in the section below, and I'll be sure to try to respond to those. As you can tell, I am in our beautiful sanctuary. You can see the pipes behind me for the pipe organ and the beautiful woodwork. The reason why I'm not in my office like I am usually am during this time is because there are children everywhere. As you know, this is the final week, hopefully fingers crossed, of virtual school here for Unicoi County. And so my boys are all over the office. They're in the chapel. I mean, this place is swarming with little boys. So if you do come to the church, you might want to hold your nose, boys and hygiene. So because of that, and because I did not want us to be interrupted, I had to move to the sanctuary. But I love our sanctuary. It is a beautiful place to be. It's a sacred, it's a holy place, and so I didn't mind at all to move our study into here. We're still in Micah 1. We got through verses 1 through 7 last time. I went quite slowly, slower than normal, and what we'll do is hopefully we'll get through the entire chapter today. That's verses. Actually, I finished, I concluded with verses 8 and 9, so technically it will be verses 10 through 16, but we'll go back and look at 8 and 9 because 8 and 9 connect well to our actual text for today. Teresa Jones says, hello. Hello to you, Teresa. I see that Brenda Kegley is watching, so if others are watching, please say hello, or if you do have a prayer request, we'll make sure that is added to our weekly prayer list. But our text for today, the latter half of Micah, starting in verse 8 and going through verse 16. Logan says, good morning to you. I like the change of scenery. I do as well. I just wish that Sherry Hendricks were here to play on the organ and make these pipes sing, just because, man, she's so good. And if you attend worship here or you listen or watch on Sunday morning, you'll definitely hear her talents at work. But change of scenery, absolutely. It's a good thing. So, background information in order to remind you of who we're dealing with here. Micah did not intend to be a prophet. He didn't sign up to this, as most of our prophets in Scripture. They were called by God. They were summoned by God. Most of us, we didn't readily sign up to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. We felt a tug. We felt a call. And so in order to respond to that call in a positive way, we said yes. But little did we know at the time when we embraced the call of maybe how difficult it was going to be. I would imagine that Micah did not know it was going to be this difficult, and yet he has this difficult task of telling the truth, of telling the people that they are not living in the ways that God would have them to live. Micah is an 8th century prophet, just like Amos, but unlike Amos, who had to go from the south to the north to speak his prophecy, Micah is from the south, and so he stays in the south. He speaks a word of judgment to Judah, particularly Jerusalem, which was the capital of Judah, the southern kingdom. At the time of this writing, the people up north, at least at the beginning of this book, are about to be removed by Assyria. They're about to be taken into Syrian captivity, and that happens around 721, 722 BCE. So what Micah is saying is, look at the people up north. What happened to the people in Samaria and Israel will soon happen to you, because you have given yourselves to other gods. So just as the north has been destroyed, you too, southern kingdom, will be destroyed as well. That's where we pick up in verse 8. And even though I read this last week, I think it's so good I think it'll be helpful if we take a step back and we look at verses 8 and 9 before we get to verse 10. The prophet says, "This is why I lament and mourn. This is why I go around in rags and barefoot. This is why I howl like a pack of coyotes and moan like a mournful owl in the night. God has inflicted punishing wounds. Judah has been wounded with no healing in sight. Judgment has marched to the city gates. Jerusalem must face the charges." I centered on this past Tuesday. The prophet says, "This is why I lament and mourn." And to me, I find this meaningful that the prophet mourns right alongside his people. And so he's not detached from his people, even though he's probably one of the few in the land who is actually doing what God would have him to do. He is not detached from them. They are his people. He is one of them. And so as he sees them going down the drain, as he sees them just struggling and in a very unhealthy spiritual place, he mourns with them. And you'll recall from last week, I said, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that we could say the same about God. That not only does Micah mourn for his people, but God mourns for his people as well. God did not want this. God does not want them to be taken into captivity. He allows them to be taken into captivity because they have given themselves to other gods. I think the same is true when you and I struggle, when you and I are found in a bastion of sin, that God mourns for us, because we serve a loving God. So not only does Micah mourn for his friends and neighbors, I think the same could be said for God. God mourns for them. But just like the people up north, he says Jerusalem must face charges. And now on to verses 10 and following. "Don't gossip about this in Telltown. Don't waste your tears in Dustville. Roll in the dust. In Alarm Town, the alarm has sounded. The citizens of Exitburg will never get out alive. Lament, Last Stand City. There's nothing in you left standing. The villagers of Bittertown wait in vain for sweet peace. Harsh judgment has come from God and entered Peace City. All you who live in Chariotville, get in your chariots for flight. You led the daughter of Zion into trusting not God, but chariots." Similar sins in Israel also got their start in you. "Go ahead and give your goodbye gifts to Goodbyeville. Mirage Town beckoned, but disappointed Israel's kings. Inheritance City has lost its inheritance. Glory Town has seen in its last of glory. Shave your heads in mourning over the loss of your precious towns. Go bald as a goose egg. They've gone into exile and they aren't coming back." You notice in this section of chapter 1, the author begins in lament and mourning. Micah begins in lament and mourning, and the end of this chapter ends in lament and mourning. And so lament and mourning sandwiches the rest of the text. It's like you have two pieces of bread. One is lament, the other is lament, and then you find the meat of the sandwich. So to me, if we have this intercalation, which is a very fancy theological word for this sandwiching technique, that the author is trying to get our attention and say this is really important. Not only does Micah, the person who delivers the prophecy, lament, but he's saying, you people in Judah, you need to lament as well. Shave your heads in mourning over the loss of your towns. He's saying, just go ahead and lament over everything that you've lost. I suspect that for many of us since COVID have experienced lament and mourning. We have lamented to God. We've complained, God, why has this happened? But we've also mourned the loss of our way of life. And we have to wonder if we're ever going to get back to a place where we once were. Personally, I have lamented. I have complained to God over the lack of normalcy. I have mourned over everything that we've lost over this 6 months. And a lot of that has to do with church. I've mourned over the fact that we cannot meet as regularly as we do. I mourn over the fact that we cannot touch one another. We cannot shake hands or hug. I've lamented to God that we don't have as many people as we have had in the past due to COVID. Will we ever fully get back to normal? When everything is normal, will everyone, or is our new normal, will everyone come back, or will folks continue to rely on virtual worship? Because when everything does settle down, I want to see you back in worship. It's not the same. Virtual worship is not the same as being in person and experiencing community in the flesh. So I have lamented, I have mourned, and Micah seems to say it's okay to mourn, it's okay to lament. We see this in the Psalms. There are so many Psalms of lament. And in fact, there are more Psalms of lament than there are Psalms of thanksgiving. And to me, that's the psalmist's way of saying, look, it's okay to lament. It's okay to complain. Do what you got to do. Take that to God, because God can handle it. So it's okay, Micah says, to lament over everything that you've lost, because you will lose. Just like the people up north, you have given yourselves to these false idols. And so be prepared to mourn the loss. So folks, it's okay to mourn. Mourn what we've lost. We can lament. God can handle it. God has broad enough shoulders. Let's lament. Let's mourn. And in fact, I think that could be a very cathartic experience. It's to be able to take all of those things to God and to cry, to complain. Take it to God, because God can handle it, and God wants to hear it. So when you want to mourn and you want to lament, you have my permission, you have Micah's permission, you have God's permission to do so. I think it could be a spiritual cleansing that is much needed in our souls. Thank you so much for joining us. Next week, we will start chapter 2 here in Micah. Hopefully, we'll see you at 10:30 next week rather than 10 o'clock. But for those of you who are able to jump on early and join us, it is very much appreciated. And please know how much I enjoy this time of spiritual reflection with you. See you next week.